So before we get into today's episode, of course, I got to let you know the comic book gods did not want you to have this interview. We had recording and internet issues on the actual recording. And so this is actually two conversations stitched together. If you can find the seam, then leave a comment and let me know. Cause, yeah, that was crazy. And then as I'm filming this intro, I'm in the middle of Hurricane Debbie. My power's been flickering all day. It's been crazy, but I promise this conversation is worth all the trouble I'm going through to make sure you hear it. And it's going to be worth your time on the listen. So huge thanks to Joe Corallo for sitting down with me twice to make sure that you got all the information that you need. And also a huge thanks to our sponsor for today's episode, Fight or Flight Comics. Fight or Flight Comics is my LCS located in Raleigh, North Carolina, in the same little spot that used to house Ultimate Comics Raleigh. They keep me covered. Dan and Emily are the best. So if you go in there, you're shopping for comics, let them know BJ Kick sent you. They'll be glad to know it, and they'll treat you even more special than they already would. And so with that, let's get into today's episode. All right, guys. So my next guest, let's just say, if you listen to people talking about comics on the internet, you'll probably recognize this next voice. But not only is he a commenter, cultural critic, if you will, but he's also a writer and editor of comics in his own right. So today I'm here to talk with Mr. Joe Corallo. How you doing, man?
Good. How are you? And thanks for having me.
No problem, man. I'm doing well. It's funny. I feel like we got conflicting things going on here. I feel like I go for like a quiet storm with my voice. And I don't know, you're somewhere between like late night talk show host and like afternoon drive talk radio and with a little sportscaster in there.
It's a little bit of that. Yeah. Yeah, I hear it.
But anyway, but how you doing, man?
Overall fine. I'm still, my voice is almost completely back from Heroes Con. It's pretty shot, but
yeah,
I'm managing.
Yeah, no, my voice is fine, but just the coming back from Heroes, I think my issue is that I took a vacation the week before. So I went on vacation, came home for 3 days, went to Heroes, and now I'm back and I just feel completely flustered. I'm almost settled back into routine though.
Nice. No, that's good. Yeah, the flight I had back was delayed too. So like got off the plane at like 5 a.m, on like Monday. So it's like, so it's kind of made the whole week a little rocky, but it's going to be fine. It's all fine.
Yeah, for sure. Everything's fine. So funny enough, right? I like to go into these interviews, like to do a fair amount of research, right? Ask questions no one else is asking. But unfortunately for you, the time I would have spent doing research somehow got sucked with me watching 2 episodes of King Arthur and the Knights of Justice. So we'd have to get this information the old-fashioned way. I'm just going to have to ask you questions.
Yeah, so, I guess so.
But I guess I'll start with, we sort of hear you as a guest on a lot of different comic channels. You tend to be, I don't know, a part of the CNN panel, if you will. Whenever there's current events, things to discuss. And, you're always introduced as like writer and editor and things, but I hadn't done much research into like just sort of your backstory and your journey in comics. So what was that like for you?
Sure. I mean, I'll go into some stuff that, I actually don't talk about that much. So way back when, I want to say around 2012, I was, I think that's right around when I met Molly Jackson, and we later edited an anthology together, mine to benefit Planned Parenthood. But I started because she, with her friend Andrea, co-ran this like pop culture website, Insert Geek Here. Okay. So I was writing like comic reviews and stuff for them, like 12, 11 years ago. That's really that. And then I became a contributor at Comic Mix, which is run by Glenn Hauman. But, at the time, there was also Denny O'Neil used to be a columnist there, and John Ostrander, and Martha Thomas's, Mike Gold, Mindy Newell. So I kind of like, that's kind of how I got, really started in, sort of comics reviews, critiquing, discussions, and things like that before, YouTube and podcasting and whatnot. And it was from being a columnist at Comic Mix that the Mine benefit anthology, sort of came out of that.
Gotcha.
And then once that happened, one of the people I work with on that, Max Asagio, I had paired her with Brian Talbot in that anthology, and she was doing more Kim and Kim. And the editor at the time, Katie Rex, had a conflict, couldn't do it for the third volume. So I was brought in for that. And, things kind of snowballed from there. But that's right around how that sort of happened. And Vault was aware of the Mine anthology and all that. And then I kind of got a relationship going with them. And that's how She Said Destroy happened, like all that sort of stuff.
Got you. So I'll ask you, the last editor I had on was Christopher Priest. And, Priest is from sort of the old Marvel bullpen and then later at DC, right? But I asked him kind of what the job of an editor was. And, he just kind of talked about like being sort of the first creative in the room. I'm curious to know how much that job has changed from then to now. Like, how would you describe the job of an editor now?
Sure. I mean, it's changed, and in some ways it's still the same. It depends where you go. Funny story about that. I know Jim Salicrup pretty well, and he's talked before in the past about, working when Christopher Priest was an editor at Marvel and being like, man, he had like a real office. Like he had it all set up like nice, like he worked in like a business. And Jim would be like, I just had like knickknacks and stuff on like the desk, and just like piles of comics and things. But he was like, but Christopher Priest, like he seemed like he was working for like a company. It was crazy, But
I can see that.
Yeah, right. It's but I mean it all varies with what is being edited. So, when it comes to creator-owned stuff, for example, it's very different a lot of times, because when it's creator-owned, you're usually brought in by the creative team to be like, we need someone to make sure the ship's staying the course. We need someone who's, keeping us all on time, checking in, making sure we're not making mistakes. When you're dealing with some of these other companies, for example, so a lot of smaller publishers, it's like creator owned, but also many times they own a piece of it.
Yeah.
So editorials are slightly different, rather than like if you were, doing a Kickstarter purely creator owned, you're like doing an image book. They still have a say in it. They still have, this is our company. We have certain parameters that we have to go by. So it's a little more hands-on. Even though it's creator owned, they're going to have suggestions of like, oh, well, can you do this, do that? They might suggest cover artists. They might, get involved in a more micro way than you would at like an image. And then there are like the work for hire gigs, and those can be a lot more, hands-on with editorial. And those are the situations where you start getting more like, no, you are the writer, you are the artist, or you are, the letter, colorist, whatever, who is hired for this project. Like the editor is then the one who is putting the team together. Sometimes if it's a licensed book, then it's the editor is presenting to the licensor,
right,
the team, and then there's that other extra layer on it. But like, if you're doing a book at like Marvel or DC or something, it's the editor who's like, okay, I'm putting this team together. Depending on where you're at, depending on certain things, maybe you have a little more say in who's on the team or who's not, or how you're going to approach it. But yeah, I mean, that is still comparable to the past, but like for like Marvel and DC, for example, they sort of ebb and flow in the different eras. So like, I think we all kind of understand that, during like some of the early eras where it was, Stan was like kind of show running everything and, having who could, fill in or do the job. But it was more or less Stan's vision for those first few years or so.
right.
Cut all the way to late 80s, early 90s, Image Revolution time. It was very artist driven situation. Famously, you had Bob Harris like giving more prominence to Jim Lee and some of the others with X-Men before Jim's departure.
Yeah.
In the early 2000s, it was like writer dominated. These writers, your Bendis's, Mark Miller's, etc., were kind of dictating more as things were going. We're right now in a very editorial driven time. So the editors now at the big two, for the most part, and this has happened in the past, and this has always kind of been there to some extent, but right now it's very much like editorial or higher up. Okay, look, we have this character that's going to be in a movie, or we know James Gunn's going to do something with Metamorpho, so we this is the time to do a Metamorpho one shot or a miniseries. Like, just an example. I'm not saying that's what's happening right now, but and then it's higher up, going down to the editor. You need to make this book, and then the editor figuring out who's getting plugged into that book, and it's maybe a little less like. Some editors, depending on the project, are looking for pitches. Others are looking for a team to fit the pitch they're going with. Like, okay, we have this, we know that, James Gunn or whatever is going to do X, Y, and Z with Metamorphose. So that's the blueprint for what we want to do. We are plugging in a team to this pitch. We're not asking a writer, what would you do with Metamorpho? We're asking a writer, can you write this exact like sort of story? So that's kind of changed things. I think a lot. Like when Christopher Priest was doing, Spider-Man, for example, when was one of the big things he was doing. And I'm not saying this to take away from Christopher Priest at all. X-Men was such a juggernaut at the time that he probably had a little more of a say and a little more wiggle room and control than if he were on, maybe even X-Men or something at that time, where it was like, this is the sales driver. And it's like, he might have had a little more, like, there were certain things that had to happen, but, he might have had like, oh, if I want to try someone out or if I want to do this, then like maybe get less pushback than if it was, Claremont on X-Men saying like doing something like, oh, I'm kind of sick of Wolverine. Let's just get rid of him. And like, there's certain things you just couldn't do. But and then, as time went on, though, like there were certain things. I think it was right when Jim Salicrup took over, was when they did The Wedding. But that was a situation where, like, Jim Shooter had asked, Jim Salicrup, like, oh, we should do this wedding. Are you good with that? And he's like, yeah. And then he was like, all right, it's going to happen in like, a couple of months. And, like, whereas initially, like, Jim Salicrup was like, oh, I got some time. Let me start planning this. And they're like, no, we need that sales bump. We need to get this moving. So, so I think there are some changes, but there's also a lot of things that are either similar or are somewhat comparable. I mean, I think probably the biggest thing, and probably something that Christopher Priest and anyone who was editing in the 80s would be like, is digital, like just being able to like upload files into like an FTP or like a Google Drive or Dropbox, or
Right.
that's huge. I mean, that was, I think it's easy to sort of forget the amount of time that was spent, and the money to FedEx things and have couriers like, running around. I mean, like when Astonishing X-Men was coming out, when Whedon and John Cassaday were doing that, it was like Marvel would just, Cassaday was in the city, so they'd send a courier to have to pick up the pages and rush around. It's crazy thinking about it at that point, but yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, so much of the job of an editor is wrangling the book together, going and snatching the pages off the artist's table. Like, no, you're done drawing, right? All the things. It's funny you mentioned it because I hadn't thought about it until you said it, but we're definitely in like an era of sort of the editor at center, right? Like even just in fan lexicon, like I can name like 7 editors off the top of my head, and it's easy, right? And it's like I'm thinking like Nate Cosby at Dynamite doing Disney stuff right now. Will Moss. Anyway, the point being, there are all these editors, like their names are just as big as the writers, and you sort of look to see, okay, well, who's doing this? Where does this fit? Right? Oh, Nick Lowe's editing this. Okay, so this is in the Spider office. All right, so this should fit in this little world. I'm even find like DC, right? DC's got the Superman world, but all the Green Lantern stuff is in there with Kaminsky, right? Like there's a bunch of stuff, but it's just funny because, and maybe I'm in the weeds because, I do this, but to the point, like the editors are really big right now.
And I believe like with I think Absolute Power is under Paul Kaminsky. So,
cool.
So, but like, and this goes into like the web and the communication because, excuse me, it's like, so if he's doing this event, there's also bat characters in it, failsafe and stuff like that. So it's like having to coordinate with the bat office and like Wonder Woman and Superman internal, he deals with it, but not Batman's without some level of coordination. So with these sort of things, that's sort of how it goes. But yeah, I believe that sort of stuff is it's like Kaminsky and down on that, or he is helming it. I think like Brittany Holzer was helmed, was it Beast World, from last year. So like all these things that others kind of like taking the reins and doing this and coordinating. It's a lot.
Yeah, for sure. So you're editing books, you're editing anthologies, you're editing books for smaller publishers. What are some of the things you're taking into consideration as you're assembling these creative teams to get these stories told?
I mean, it's a combination of things, right? So like you want someone that's going to fit the book or the property or you think can. I do think everyone, who's editing, you always have to be scouting and be mindful of different things and be aware of what's out there because it's very easy to keep going back to the same people over and over again.
Yeah.
Or to, pigeonhole people, unfairly many times because it's like, oh, I got you to do this horror book and you did really well. So I'm just going to keep, calling you for horror books and like, oh, I have this sci-fi book, but you're a horror guy. And it's like, no, you made that guy horror guy, like by just giving the horror book. So like, so there is that element to it. But you also have to balance that with working with people that are going to get it done and done on time and not stress you out. Every editor who's done enough editing in comics will have stories that are like, well, it was, this person handed in things on time. This person did not. This person really did not. And you get sort of to a point of you have to weigh, is the stress of it worth the payoff of the product? And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. There have been many nights, depending on the different project, where I'm sending emails at 2 a.m. just being like, I can't go to sleep until I know I got this, because this is going to the printer in the morning. So like, I'll keep bugging you because because I'm not getting sleep, and you need to know you are making me not go to sleep. So,
right.
It happens, but a lot of times it's all right, but you run into these problems is a strong word, but you run into these situations where anyone who's in comics kind of knows comics enough to be like, oh, well, I can blow this deadline because I know the editor's not going to give me like the actual deadline. They're going to like give me like, oh, I'm going to tell you I need it this day. So there's like that week buffer when you blow it. Right. And then it turns into like, oh, well, I know I have an extra week, and then they blow that week. So there's some of that. But I mean, I've also worked with people that get things in early, and I never have to, track them down. And it's situations like that where you go like, if you're making my life easy, I want to figure out ways to work with you again. Like I will finagle ways to do that. And, unless you are so good, it's worth it.
Yeah. So with all that in consideration, right, I think so often what we hear, at least on YouTube, is the fan perspective, right? So people will complain about the creative direction of a story or dialogue or art or whatever the case may be. And, I certainly never think in those moments like, yeah, but he probably got it in on time, and it's probably easier to work with that guy than whoever else I'd insert in that place, right? How long before the publisher even realizes fan reaction or reception, or is it really just sales and no one's really looking at the noise around books?
It's all tough because of how it works, right? Where it's, you have your final order cutoffs, you have your, stores for the most part have already finished ordering the first 3 issues before the first issue comes out.
Yeah.
And there's a sort of natural cutting in half between, issue 1 and 2, which is why you occasionally hear stories like I believe this is the case of, like Conan the Barbarian over at Titan was, oh, the sales are actually ticking back up. And that's because of the strong word of mouth. But often, the sales naturally go down because they don't know what it's going to sell. You don't want to sit on so much product before anything happens. So, you get books like that. There are a handful of other books that have been doing that recently. But usually when you hear stories about books getting extended beyond like a miniseries or something like that, that tends to be after like the 3rd or 4th issue, because they need to get to a point where does issue 1 sell out? Does issue 2, like, is there does it need to go to another printing? That's a little tricky though, because especially, if you're a publisher of a certain size or something like that, or maybe you just, or you want to get some free press, maybe you do a print run that is going to sell out. Not that it's like, I'm not saying it's like, ooh, a 500 print run so we can sell, but it's enough where they're like, we know that it'll sell out, so we can go to second printing. And then after that, it's like, okay, what are the reorders on issue 2 after issue 1 comes out? that's where you start figuring out like, oh, okay, so if the numbers start ticking up, like if you get to like issue 5, 6, and the numbers are going up, like Conan was doing, if reorders start going up for issue 2, if issue 2 sells out like after the fact because of reorders, things like that, then that's when you're like, okay, there's something going on here,
right?
With this book, because it has to go beyond just issue 1, because speculators, things like that, that aren't necessarily going to be there for issue 13,
right? Right. Cool. So you go from sort of critic and columnist, you get into sort of editorial roles, and of course now you're writing comics. But was writing and editing comics always the goal, or was it a thing that kind of happened and you're like, oh, hey, I'm here, let's do more?
I mean, it was always the goal to do creative writing. I mean, I've been a comics fan since about 3rd grade. I was big on Sonic the Hedgehog. I found out that Archie was doing Sonic comics, so I was picking those up, and that got me to like get my parents to drag me to the different local comic shops, go back issue diving, get a subscription mailed to the house. So that really got me into comics, like specifically like direct market comics. And then, in high school, started reading more like, Marvel, Runaways, Ultimate Spider-Man, things like that. But I took creative writing in high school and college, at least one course in both. I did like, Mega Man and Sonic fan fiction in like elementary school. But yeah, it was always in my mind. I had friends in like college who wanted to figure out doing like superhero related type like TV pitches. So I worked on some stuff like that. And I'm trying to think. I think a lot of the stuff we were working on there, like that was like a bit of like superheroes in college kind of setting.
Yeah.
And I suggested it be called Masters of the University. And right? But like
it works. I like it.
Yeah. Right. So see art, it was a good idea. Anyway, so I did that, but then I was working, I was involved in political campaigns for a couple of years or so out of college, but I wanted to get back to writing. And when I did, I was like, I want to stick to comics.
Yeah.
Because, and I started, self-publishing some stuff back in 2010. So I was doing it like really before I got into like the comics criticism, really. But so I self-published 2 issues of one book and then like 4 of another book.
Yeah.
The first one was with Bob Wolf, who has a big like gaming YouTube channel. It's like over 700,000 subs. Like Wolfsten does very well.
Nice.
And then the other guy I collaborated with when I was self-publishing was Danny Luckert, who's gone on to do he just did something with Karina Becco at Boom, a sci-fi book. And then he did Red Mother at Boom as well.
Lucky me, I got the internet right here. Let's look it up. Oh,
yeah, Danny Luckert.
Is that Luckert?
Luckert, yeah.
Cool. What is happening? All right, I don't know what's going on with my internet, but the Zoom call's still working, so hey.
That's good. That's good, Dan. I bet I can do it on my phone, I bet. Give me a second. It's what was the Space Between.
Okay, got you.
Yeah, so he's doing that right now. Yeah, Red Mother. He did a few books with with Cullen Bunn.
Mm.
So he's doing great. So
That is awesome.
thank you.
So you're always into creative writing. You get into criticism, you get into editing, and you find your way back into writing comics. So I'll ask this. I feel like I ask this fairly often with other people, but
Sure.
as a writer, are you writing because you feel like there's a specific story that needs to be told? Like, I know, like talking to Greg Pak, right? Like he talks about like sort of themes in his work, and the goal of his writing really just sort of highlighting the humanity in whoever the character may be, and feeling like he could tell stories, or you could bring more people together, like telling stories than like being politically active, because he worked on political campaigns as well. So like there's people that bring like these sort of, I guess, virtues or themes to their writing, and they're like, all right, this is what I'm doing. This is my manifesto. Or is it just like, hey, I want to tell stories just because?
Yeah, I think, for me, I do like ideally want to tell a story. I want to pull on people's heartstrings. I want to make them laugh, things like that. But there is an element of it that, like, yeah, that's where the passion lies. But also, I love writing. So I would rather get paid to write than paid to do other things.
Yeah.
So I will write a job that's and I do like some copywriting for companies on the side and things like that, because it's writing. I'm getting paid to write, and and that's great to me. But yeah, I mean, sometimes with things, maybe you're working with an editor on a property, or you're working with a licensor, and you have to tell a certain story, or you have to get a certain thing across that may not, it may not be the idea you would have had, or it may not be, exactly how you want to tell the story, but like that's the job. Yeah, there's an element of this is a job, and you're getting paid to do a job for certain projects. I think for me, and I think for a lot of writers, it's important to balance that. I think, if you're trying to survive off comics, and your approach is, I have to be very selective with what I do, and I'm trying to tell this kind of story or have a specific message, and that's it, you're going to be in trouble. If you have another job or another source of income, and this is, either a hobby or something that isn't, vital to your survival, then sure, of course, do that all day. And I do think, and this is a completely other conversation, we won't get into, but I do think that there should be more of a discussion, understanding around that. It's okay for this to be a hobby for people, and their books are just as important as, people that this is their job, and it's okay. And people shouldn't have imposter syndrome over that sort of stuff, or feel like they shouldn't be in the room. But when it comes to that sort of thing, and then the other side of that is, if you get to a point where there's no passion, and it's just, I just need the paycheck, man, you're just doing it, that is another separate and equally, if not more, devastating of a problem to have. So it's about balancing that. You need to balance your expectations. You need to do something to feed your passion, interest, but and you also have to make money, and work on things that you may not be passionate about. There is a difference between working on something that you feel is like adverse to your moral standing. That is different. I'm talking about, like, oh, I really want to tell a story about Superman in space, but they're like, nope, he's grounded for a year, and you're not allowed to use Lex Luthor, and you're not allowed to use Brainiac, and just being like, I'll figure it out,
Right.
like rather than So just to clarify,
Yeah. No, for sure. It's funny. I just at Heroes Con, the only panel I went to was one of the first on Friday, and it was Greg Rucka, Mark Guggenheim, Stephanie Williams, and
nice.
Rodney Barnes. And the talk was supposed to be about like this sort of writing across different genres.
Yeah.
But the point was raised, I want to say by Stephanie, but just about the fact that like, hey, it's okay for this to be a job. Like it's okay to acknowledge that this is a job. Sure, there are people who would love to be writing for these companies, right? But you shouldn't be made to feel like, oh, I'm just lucky to be in the room all the time.
Oh yeah.
And I think it was Greg that chimed in like, yeah, like, sometimes I write because I like, having lights on and living
Yeah.
in a house, right? So, yeah, it's funny that you kind of said the same thing, like, got to pay the bills, got to get the lights on. But yeah, there's definitely a happy medium that has to be found.
For sure. And I think part of reaching that too is I think it's healthy to approach these, like I try to approach it as a challenge.
Mhm.
Like if they're like, hey, this is the project, you have to get this done. I look at it as a challenge, a puzzle to solve, rather than like, that's not the idea I had. I'm like, how can I do this? Like what is the key to breaking this story and making it happen in the way they're trying to envision? Because I just look at that as like, okay, you're starting here, the story needs to go there. Go through that maze. How do you get there? How do you figure it out? And
Right.
and I think that's a good way to try to look at it and tackle those things and keep it interesting for yourself.
All right, Joe. So we're talking about doing work like writing um, as a passion, as a love, labor of love, and then also as a labor, right?
Yes.
So how does King Arthur and the Knights of Justice come about for you?
So for me, it actually came about in part because I was a fan of the show at the time when it was airing. I was at Baltimore Comic Con, this would have been 2022. And I had wrapped up the script duties on Dahlia in the Dark. That first issue was prepped, getting ready to go to the printer because that was out in December 2022.
Mm-hmm.
So I was talking to some of the people over at Mad Cave because they were boothing there, and it was basically like, hey, I like doing Dahlia, I like doing Beck Star, so like I'd love to do more stuff if there's something else coming up. And they mentioned, well, since you mentioned, are you aware of Princess Guinevere and the Jewel Riders? And I was like, I didn't watch that as a kid, but I watched the show King Arthur and the Knights of Justice.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh, okay, like we'll keep that in mind, like interesting. And then later on, they were like, we actually do have the rights to this show, and we talked a little bit back and forth, and I was able to get that gig, which was great.
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of fun working on that. And I'd love to do more. So people should probably buy that to give me that opportunity, because that'd be really, really nice.
So I'm curious as to how this goes because in researching for this interview, well, I should have been researching, ended up just watching King Arthur and the Knights of Justice for like 2 hours. But it struck me as a cartoon that was like just so clearly 80s. I mean, it's a 90s cartoon, but I don't know if it's just a theme song or just the sports references or the fact that they reference Madonna or what. But it's like this show just feels like it feels like a period piece. But you're writing this graphic novel, and obviously it has to have some sort of modern sensibilities, or maybe there is just like the sort of flashback or nostalgic nature to it. How are you balancing that, or looking at this property and saying, well, let's write something with this world and universe, but today?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to stay true to a lot of what was going on in the show, but yeah, update a little bit, age it up a little. I got to, have some more violence, and it's a little darker and grittier than the cartoon was, but you want to keep it in that same vein. So for me, part of that was keeping that like over the top Merlin and Morgana stuff, making sure that Arthur's still more or less like a Boy Scout type character. But yeah, I think part of how we were able to do that, Gaia Cardinelli, the artist, kept the designs pretty close to the cartoon. So I think that did a lot of the heavy lifting, doing that and keeping Merlin and Guinevere and some of these other characters speaking certain ways. I think kind of kept that, but the biggest thing for me with this was the difference between a show that was designed for syndication and to last versus doing a graphic novel that has like a nice little bow on it that tells you a complete story. So like there were elements of the show that I decided and it went over well was like the keys that they had to get to like free them each individually. Like there wasn't time for something like that in this format. Like it works great if you have a show that you want to have like 100 or so episodes of that's a great device to keep things moving along and to keep the stakes high and things throughout. But it doesn't work in a one and done sort of graphic novel format. So like making those kind of decisions were part of it.
Got you. And now you've edited or written on comics for a bunch of different age ranges, but what are the considerations that you're making when it's a graphic novel for presumably a younger audience?
Now with that, I mean, this is something I heard from Fred Van Lente at a bar years ago. I think it was Fontana's in the Lower East Side when they still recorded Comic Book Club Live there. So this is like maybe like 10, 11 years ago or something. Where and Fred is also very well known, not just for some of his darker and grittier comics that he's done over the years, but for doing comics more for kids, like the comic book history of comics and animation and comics about like the presidents and things like that.
Yeah,
and his advice was basically talking about this sort of stuff. Tell the story you want to tell. Like don't like sort of pigeonhole yourself into like, I need to tell a story that's going to appeal very specifically to 12 to 17-year-olds or something like that. It's like, tell the story. If it's a good story, people read it. And so the only real considerations for me with something like this was like, make sure it's not over the top violence to a certain point. Just be aware of that and the language, and otherwise, tell as mature a story as you would, for anything. But part of that too was something like King Arthur and the Knights of Justice that also made it easier was, having the show and stuff. You want to stay true to the show, so there are things like the characters wouldn't say or do that's kind of like baked in, so it wouldn't even cross my mind to have them in certain situations. So all of that together, sort of guided this. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really struggle too much in terms of trying to make it fit in that exact way. But yeah, I think the best way to go, if possible, and I know it's very difficult with the way some things are or what people are looking for, very specific sort of niche things, is telling a good story, and then I think you're probably better off telling a good story and then having the editor or the licensor then be like, you can't do X, Y, or Z, rather than censoring yourself too much outside of the obvious things like language and like over the top violence and stuff like that.
Right. So, I mean, obviously you're a writer and you love writing, you love storytelling, and I'm sure there's a bunch of ideas floating around in your head, right? But to what degree are these ideas things that you're actively pursuing? Like maybe you're pitching it to someone like, okay, well, I've got this idea for maybe this character and maybe you have to repurpose it or something. Or is it just someone's calling you up like, hey, you got anything for this? Like, how does that work for you?
At this point in my comics writing career, it's kind of split down the middle. I get asked to write work for hire things, but I'm also actively pitching. So I'll have, I'm sure a lot of comic writers have this, but I have, a bunch of Google Docs of different pitches and in various degrees of development. And, I might do a round of pitches with it. If it doesn't get any traction, put it to the side a bit, come back, retool it a bit, and maybe try it again. There's one idea I've been kicking around for a while. I won't get into the specifics here, but I was like, you know what? This actually this could work in a different way if I change like the overall story, like the background and the action and what's sort of driving it is sort of similar. But I'm like, I can change the characters and their motivations, and it's a fresh, different idea, and I can send that back out and be like, well, what if we take it in this direction? So I'm in the process of doing that with one of them. There's a couple of others too that, there's different opportunities come up to pitch, or you talk to different editors or different publishers pop up, and sometimes things like that happen. I'll be like, wait a minute, I had this idea like 3 years ago. Let me look. I think it kind of fits with this new publisher, or this publisher that maybe I now have a relationship with that I didn't when I was initially pushing it. And, I look it over and I'm like, I can update this, and this, and, boom. That works, like maybe, a comic that, I put in like the log line, like it's The Good Place meets blah, 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 and it didn't get picked up 4 or 5 years ago, and I'm refreshing it. I'm like, well, maybe now let me pick something that's a little more, relevant or talked about in the moment, as much as I love The Good Place, for example, something like that.
Right. And so with that, like how far does your sort of journal go back? Like, are you, I don't know. Some people feel like they're ideas people. And so it's like, okay, that pitch didn't work. I'm done with that pitch forever. I'm coming up with something new. Other people will like write down every idea they've ever had and kind of flip through it. Like, okay, maybe it'll work this time, or, where do you see yourself on that spectrum?
I mean, I do just tend to come up with, new ideas or other ideas. Like I have a pitch I was working on very recently that I came up with on a phone call the other, like a week, 2 weeks ago, and is moving along. It's very like I leave myself open to that sort of stuff, and I'll pursue something, or I'll hit the pause button on something, or like, there's also been times where I've had a pitch and there was some interest in it maybe. And like, oh, make these changes or do this. And like, we'll see. And like, sometimes you're doing it and it's like, well, if I do this, or if I'm approaching it this way, like, I don't know if it's going to work that way, or like, I don't know if that story I want to tell. So like, maybe I'll back burner this and go with a different idea that, people can be more on board with out the gate, or that the suggestions align closer to what I'm wanting to do, or what I was thinking. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be a good fit here. So like, for me, I feel like, I understand story enough. I can just come up with ideas. I don't really, well, like if I'm working on a pitch and I see something similar is coming out, I can pivot and work on something else. I'm not I know there are certain types of people, and I get it. It's a personality type thing too, where you fixate on like, this is my idea and this is what I want to do, and that's just not me. I'm happy to come up with ideas, and I could come up with 5 ideas, and a publisher could be like, we don't like any of them, and I'll be like, I got 5 more in me. I'll hit you up, soon. I'll give you another 5. You don't like that? I got another 5, and just keep going, because they're just ideas.
Right.
It's when you understand story structure and character and this and that, you can kind of like mix and match things. You can, slight tweaks, completely, just like revamp an idea. So yeah, that's kind of how I look at it.
Got you. Okay, so recently you were a part of the DC Pride celebration of Rachel Pollack, and
Yep.
So it put a few of her writings kind of back into print, and then told some new stories, including yours, which features Coagula. How was it being brought into that project, and I guess what does Rachel Pollack's work mean to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, I had known Rachel for years, and I was already a fan of that run before I was a friend of hers. So I kind of knew exactly, like once this was set up, what to do to make it make sense and to make it work within the continuity. Because for me, the continuity was really important. And I wanted to make sure, I'm like, look, I want to bring her back, and I want to do it in a way that makes sense within the story. I don't want to wave the magic wand and, forget these different things that happened prior. I want this to be a very concrete sort of like, this is a thing that's set up within the rules of the comic that are established. And to do that in a way to sort of celebrate her. So, I came up with this idea of, she's in, her consciousness is still in Cliff's mind from when they fused together during the Tiresias War, and was kind of also able to use that as like an excuse while she's in this consciousness to sort of have a greatest hits of Rachel going through and seeing these other characters that showed up in a run and bring up some different things. Like that was all very important to me. I had suggested Rye Hickman and John Workman and Andrea, who I worked with on this story. She was the editor. It was her call to even have me involved to write this story. And she was very open to the idea of working with, Rye Hickman and John Workman. She had already she was in the process of working with John on another thing at Black Label anyway. And he was the letterer of Rachel's run. So, I thought it was important to have something like that in this. It meant a lot for me to have John on it. And I actually got to hang out with John a little bit at Heroes Con. And, we got to talk a little bit about it, which was very nice. And Rye, I had worked with before. I knew Rye had done some stuff recently at DC's. We had talked in the past of like, it'd be great if like a situation popped up where we could work together again. It was like, ooh, a 10-pager, like done. This was the way to do it. But, that's this sort of thing doesn't happen without DC wanting it to happen, without Andrea's enthusiasm and support. Along with the rest of editorial, Chris Conroy was also, very supportive of this. And it was Andrea's suggestion at the very end. I got to put this little note sort of about Rachel under the credits, and that was Andrea. She said, that we have a little extra room here if you want to put, a little something, and I came up with that for it. But no, it meant the world to me to work on that. I've loved Doom Patrol for a long time. I loved it before I read Rachel's run. I think like a lot of people of a certain age, I was introduced to it through Grant's run. Not at the time it was coming out. I was too young at the time to comprehend what was happening there. I was reading like, Archie, Sonic the Hedgehog comics while things like that were coming out. But it's something that means a lot to me. I have original artwork from both Grant and Rachel's run. And I've gotten to become friends with Richard Case as well. We got to hang out a bit at Heroes. We got breakfast on Sunday at Heroes, which was very nice. We, it was at that French bakery, like that was like diagonally across with all the crazy chandeliers and stuff.
Yeah. Very cool.
That was great. It seemed like a thing that you could have seen in a Doom Patrol comic or the show, that bakery.
Right.
So,
definitely elaborate, that place.
Yeah. Yeah, I loved it. That was great.
Nice. And so you've also got this upcoming, it's coming out August 24th, a new comic from Archie, Kardak the Mystic. What's the story about?
So for Kardak the Mystic, this is a Golden Age character who was one of those magician type superheroes. It was basically him and his fiancee Lorna, and they would solve mysteries or weird happenstances and robberies, and they would deal with everything from gangsters to fishmen and things like that. So and I love that era. I love a lot of these like Golden Age comics, and I had gotten to use Kardak in the first thing I did with Archie, which was a short in Jinx Fairy Tales. So this was an opportunity to sort of like go back, like revamp and spend like a whole issue on like doing something with Kardak. I got to use Lorna a lot as well. I thought that was important to using Kardak. And this, I think, will appeal to a lot of people. Like if you like that Vertigo era sort of comics, if you like, it's very sort of like, dark superhero-y meets, horror, supernatural stuff, like a Constantine kind of thing, like a Zatanna, Zatara, Justice League Dark. Like I think there's like elements of that in it that I think people really appreciate.
Got you. And let's see. So the art on Kardak the Mystic is by Butch Mappa, with colors by Ellie Wright and letters by Jack Morelli. What's it been like working with this creative team?
I mean, it's been fantastic, honestly. I hadn't worked with Butch or Ellie directly before. Butch was also in the Happy Horrordays anthology one shot. He illustrated different stories, so we have been in the same book together. But this is the first time collaborating together. He's been incredible. I couldn't believe how good the pages turned out. Like just crazy. I'm genuinely very impressed by it. And Ellie I've known for years. We've never worked together until now, but I've seen her at cons. I actually got to hang out with her a little bit in Dublin back in March. I went there and it overlapped with Dublin Comic Con, so I dropped in there. So I got to see her for a little bit. So I mean, that's been great too. I've been a fan of hers for a while, and Jack is a pretty mainstay letterer. So I've been lettered by Jack before, and again, just very professional. There's nothing. There's never any notes or issues or anything when Jack's involved, for sure. So
Now, is this a mini series? Is it an ongoing, or how long do you think this story's running?
Well, look, we'll have this one shot, and then we'll see where things go from there. We're introducing, Kardak to, I think a lot of the people who are picking up, the darker horror, supernatural Archie characters, and Archie has been in the process. The last year it was a lot of one shots, and then this year, Judgment Day is like Judgment Day, Cursed Library, like they're working their way back into doing some more miniseries. So, I highly suggest you can, pre-order, at your local comic shop, Kardak the Mystic. So, I suggest, people do that. If the orders are high, there's always that chance of coming back. So, I'd certainly love that. I'd love to work with Butch again. So, as well as Ellie and Jack, obviously. But, yeah. And I think there's a lot more fun that could be had with Kardak. But, I will say, I think people will get, a full, satisfying story reading this one shot.
Nice. Well, yeah. So Kardak the Mystic, #1, it's a one shot. 2 covers available. The cover A, which is by League of Comic Geeks, you suck. The cover artist is Butch Mappa for cover A.
Yeah.
And then on the B cover, that one is by Skylar Partridge.
Yeah.
Partridge. So very cool. Actually, I don't know which cover I like better. I think I like the A cover best.
Yeah, no, they're both great. Yeah.
Really good. And I'm not familiar with Kardak the Mystic. He kind of looks almost like Gomez Adams a bit.
Yeah. A little bit.
With like the vampire streak. I like it. Looks cool.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that was Butch was responsible for, coming up with this like updated version of Kardak. So
nice. So we've talked a lot about just sort of approaches to writing, writing as a job versus writing as a passion. Where are you seeing yourself going? What are sort of the things you're looking to get into, and kind of how are you mapping things out over the next few years?
I mean, it's a lot of just keep writing. It's I mean, I have plenty of other pitches. Getting to do more work for hire stuff. It's something I enjoy. I'll gladly do more. So I would love to sort of, split my time between, work for hire gigs and some creator owned stuff. That's really, where I'd like to be. I'd certainly, keep doing work with the different publishers I have been, if they'd have me again. So yeah, I mean, working with Archie is, fantastic. It was great working with Andrea at DC. I have a really good relationship at Mad Cave. I have a good relationship with, Dynamite from the times I've done editing there. I'll gladly edit at Dynamite again. So I'm happy to keep working with, all those publishers and others. I hope I'm still doing stuff for, all of them in, 5 years at some point or another. But yeah, and, I wouldn't mind, doing like, King Arthur: The Knights of Justice was like my first YA graphic novel. I certainly wouldn't mind doing some more YA stuff. I definitely wouldn't mind doing more original graphic novels. I hope I put out a few more of those in the next few years. And there's a few other publishers I'd like a chance to work with. So maybe ideally I'll have gotten to work with a couple more too in the next few years. But yeah, I mean, that's really, where I'd like to be. I'd like to, mostly write, but I still do enjoy editing. again, happy to, continue doing that. And, probably do a little more with crowdfunding. I'm planning on, at some point, before the end of the year, I have a one shot that I'd like to crowdfund, because those are pretty hard. Like, it's funny. There's a lot of publishers, a higher end, your Marvels, DCs, Archies, things like that, that will do one shots on certain characters, but it's very difficult to get a one shot over at, creator owned place. Yeah. And it makes sense. If you have a one shot with Batman, people know who Batman is. People know who Spider-Man is. Right. If it's a one shot of some guy from somebody, it's a hard sell. I get it. Yeah. So,
Got you. Well, I'll definitely be on the lookout for it. And for those in the audience who also want to look out for the next big things from Joe Corallo, where can they find you?
They can find me at I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky at Joe Corallo. So that's JoeCorallo, and at Instagram I'm at Corallo Joe. So
okay. Nice. Well, Joe, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me and to our audience. Really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to Kardak and a bunch of other stuff that I didn't even know existed. Now I got to go grab King Arthur, the Knights of Justice. I'm excited.
Great. Thank you.
No problem at all. Well, look, guys, again, I'll leave all of Joe's links down in the show notes and in the description of this video for the channel members. So check out all Joe's works and pre-order Kardak the Mystic, one shot from Archie, in shops on August 14th. And after you do that, I don't know, read something dope today. Peace.